Ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Ticklish Business, all about honoring and celebrating the world of old Hollywood. As always, I am Kristen Lopez, joined by the amazing and very patient Emily Edwards. Emily, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah. Okay.
We have talked about doing this episode for probably about 3 years. I promised this as a Patreon perk that took a really long time for us to hit the number. Actually, I don't even know if we ever did. I don't even remember what number I gave. I think it was like 500 people. We never got there. And then I just said I'd do it when we celebrated our 1 year, and then that didn't happen. So if you've been a long-time listener to the show, you know that I have teased this episode, or threatened, depending on how you want to take it. But we are finally talking about it to close out 2025, because it just seems apropos to talk about a major disaster. We are talking about 1970s Gable and Lombard. Yay! And I could not do an episode about Gable Lombard without having some sort of Gable or Lombard expert. And I could only think of one person. He has talked to us before about CAROLE Lombard, but he is author Robert Matzen. Robert, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you
Even
for
though
being
you
brave.
invited me to talk about this picture.
Yeah. Please don't hold that against us.
Exactly. Thank you for being brave and wanting to talk about it. Robert is the author of the great must-read book, Fireball, CAROLE Lombard and the Mystery of Flight 3, if you've never read it. It is essential old Hollywood reading, in my opinion, to actually learn about Lombard and her tragic demise and her life. It's a great book. But Gable and Lombard is the quasi-true story. We're going to talk about how true it is. It's a biopic on the relationship between Clark Gable and CAROLE Lombard. Clark Gable played by James Brolin, and CAROLE Lombard played by Jill Clayburgh. And the movie is pretty much just a look at their burgeoning relationship, their enemies to lovers plotline, how they dealt with the fact that Gable was married, and ultimately Lombard's untimely demise in a plane crash at the age of 33. So I had seen this before, long time ago, when I was kind of going through like my old Hollywood biopic series. If you have looked at the old Ticklish Biz website, I did a long-running series of reviews, and I included Gable and Lombard. And it's one thing to talk to hear about this movie; it's another thing to see it, because it's just really bizarre. It comes at this really interesting time in Hollywood history where they're looking back at their past. And so you got a lot of biopics in the 70s, a lot of infamous old Hollywood bombs that came out in the 1970s into the 1980s about events of the 40s and 60s, and we'll talk about a few of them. But this movie's terrible. And it's not that it's terrible in the sense like it's incompetently made. It's made by real people, directors and screenwriters that like had cachet in Hollywood. And it's got two actors that were relatively hot at the time. And yet the finished product is such a mess of biopic 101 flaws that it becomes just the most torturous 2 hours that you will experience. Emily, you came into this probably as cold as you could get.
Yeah.
What was your background with Gable Lombard before this? What are your intro thoughts on this actual film?
Not as well known I did not know as much about CAROLE Lombard as I did about Clark Gable. I had seen more Clark Gable movies than I had seen CAROLE Lombard movies. I knew she died really young, but in what capacity or circumstances, I did not know. Clark Gable, the first time I had seen this was right after a lot of press on Clark Gable about his illegitimate child, and the way that she came to existence was making headlines. And so I had that sort of veneer or like scrim over my understanding of Clark Gable. So that colored my experience of Clark Gable quite significantly. Knew both of the actors. Brolin I knew better by being the father of Josh Brolin and Barbara Streisand's husband. So, unfortunately, I did not get the full Brolin experience. Jill Clayburgh I knew because she was really big on Broadway. She was a really big theater actress. And so like I knew her reputation from growing up outside of New York City. But other than that, I wasn't really as well versed in her career. So again, like I'm coming at this, like you said, from an extremely cold and unknowing sort of like or uneducated place. Like, you know, I always talk about how I write when it's like someone is ignorant but intelligent. They don't know, but they can learn. And I was like, I don't know anything about these people, but I can learn. And what I learned was Carole Lombard cursed a lot and Clark Gable never told the truth ever in any situation.
I love that. Robert, I want to throw the question to you as well. How do you look at as somebody who has profiled Carole Lombard? You have this breadth of expertise about her. What was your background with this movie, and how do you look at it as a Hollywood author and biographer of Lombard?
So I saw it first run in 1976.
Oh, you were there in the soup at the beginning. I love it.
I was, and there weren't
paid.
many people in the theater back then. They were the smart ones who stayed home. But even then, and I was young, you know, I was a teenager, and I knew that this movie missed the mark then, and I didn't know much about Gable or Lombard, and like Emily, I knew more about Gable at that time. But the problem with it, I remember when it came out, there was a lot of buzz. They tried to create buzz around this depiction of Louis B. Mayer by Alan Garfield, this talented young character actor was going to play Mayer. And they made a big deal of the fact that they had recreated Louis B. Mayer's office. And so I can recommend this movie if you really want to see what Louis B. Mayer's office looked like. And this morning, honestly, that was all I could say to recommend this picture.
I love when movies kind of get touted as, oh man, the set design is so great. And then you just have to, you know, Kristen and I talk about that quite a bit where we go, man, the costuming on this was wonderful. And that's just and you just let that sort of peter out into the ether. You paid to see this movie. I'm so sorry.
I think that it sets up kind of discussing the numerous issues with this movie. So, like I said, this was a real spate of biopics in the 1970s. You're getting kind of that not quite 30-year gap, but you're getting this intersection of the old Hollywood actors are still around, but they're starting to get old, but they remember that time. And then you have this new crop of film lovers, you know, eventually what we would see become kind of the indie filmmaker generation of the 1970s that leads into the film school generation of the 80s and 90s. So a lot of people that had studied these films are still relatively young. You're getting this intersection of we want to celebrate old Hollywood while we still have some people that remember it, you know, that were there. And I think around this time, you're also starting to see the consolidation of a lot of these studios. MGM will ultimately start selling off its lot in this decade, you know, the famous MGM auction. So there's this desire to preserve old Hollywood, and you got a lot of it starting in the 60s. So you get something like, or 1970s, excuse me. You're getting The Day of the Locust. 75 alone, you're getting Inserts, which is Richard Dreyfuss movie. The year after, you're getting Nickelodeon. The Wild Party was also this year. Next year, the year after, you get The Last Tycoon, Hearts of the West, which is probably one of the better movies about that time. It's not directly about the silent era cowboy films. It's inspired by it. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend it. You get this, you get the atrocious, probably more atrocious than this movie, Goodbye Norma Jean in 76. You get adaptations of biopics about, you know, Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. You see Fields, you get Bogey in 1980, which that is a weird one to watch. And then ultimately, Mommy Dearest kind of kills the franchise in 81, although the movies were not good leading up to that. And I think you get Harlow, the various Harlows in there as well. So this is all part of this kind of desire to enmesh this idea of what old Hollywood looks like and get some of those people that were included. You get Red Buttons in here. But really it doesn't matter, because what's bizarre is that there was a Gable and Lombard book that had come out this same year. And I actually will take a picture and I'll post it on our Instagram. I was at a old Hollywood book sale at the Hollywood Heritage Museum this year, and I found a copy of that book, which weirdly enough has the Gable and Lombard poster on it. Why? Because they didn't use it as source material? I have no idea. Supposedly this was an idea by Sidney J. Furie, who is the director, and Barry Sandler, who is the screenwriter. They wanted to do a film about Gable and Lombard, and so they just did it. I don't know what Sandler utilized as source material, but it fails to capture anything that would explain what made these two actors popular or interesting, and it plays with time. Time doesn't exist in this movie at all. Robert, I want to throw it to you because the movie, in theory, starts in 32. Gable and Lombard met in the early 30s, but there's a large period of time in that middle 30s where they didn't interact, and they didn't start a relationship until about 36. But yet this movie seems to say it all happens in about, a 6-month period?
Yeah, so you're calling on my memory of this thing, and I haven't seen it for probably 25 years. I've seen it twice, like Emily. I sat through it first run, and then I had to go back and see if I remembered it right, and I did. But yeah, they met in the early 30s, but they met while Carol was married to William Powell. Then she divorced Powell, and then she took up with Russ Columbo, and that was a big, big, big thing in her life. Russ Columbo was a very needy human, shall we say, and took all of her time and attention until he died under those mysterious circumstances. Then she went through a period of mourning, and it was after that she and Gable met up at this party and realized, hey, we got nothing to lose here. Let's go for it. And then they took off, and then they were pretty much inseparable. My biggest gripe with Gable and Lombard is it made no attempt to capture the real personalities of these two. As you said, Kristen, this was sort of like a couple of cardboard cutouts on the screen. It's just like generic movie actress, generic leading man getting together rather than trying to nail these sophisticated personalities, this old soul Carole Lombard and this, pampered sort of prima donna Clark Gable. They didn't go for that at all.
What's funny is you throw out a lot of things that unfortunately are either not in the movie or are vastly untrue. So we don't even hear anything, Emily, about Carole Lombard's love life. We don't know that she's been married. We don't know any of the tragedy of her backstory in the film. She is just conceived like Athena out of Zeus's head. She just shows up at a Hollywood party as a corpse. They bring her in, which I read was based on a real party that she had, kind of a lunatics taking over the asylum type of thing. But we don't know about her relationships. The only relationship that has any impact on the narrative is Gable's marriage that he is. I love that we try to say, well, I've been trying to get out of it for years, but she doesn't want me to. So it's not my fault that I can't get divorced. But Robert, you were saying kind of the prima donna element. Gable keeps iterating throughout this movie like he's just sold to the earth. He's just folks. The first moment he has with Carol, she's like, to you, money doesn't mean anything. To me, I'm still making $80 a week, and I'm like, this is 1932, dude. You're like gay. And then at a certain point, she's like, well, you're the king of the lot. What year are we in? What year? Is this Gone with the Wind? Is it post? I have no idea. And then, of course, there's and I think that's the problem, is time slips continually throughout this movie. At one point, she talks about how, they call you Duke. Or wait, that's John Wayne. And I'm like, again, this is 1932. He's still Marion Morrison at this point. He is not even in Stagecoach. I know these things, okay? Why does this movie not?
What this movie feels like, and I'm going to say something I haven't seen yet, but I desperately want to. This feels like the Oh Mary version of of old Hollywood, where it's like someone wrote a play based on vibes and the general gist. And that's kind of what this entire movie feels like, which would be fine if it was presented as a comedy or a spoof or some kind of esoteric weird thing like Oh Mary is by Cola Scola. But this is presented as though it's a factual biopic. I would love to know more about Carole Lombard being married to William Powell, because I could not imagine leaving William Powell for literally anybody. But like, I could not, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And poor, God, I forget it. I'm going to edit that part out. Someone take it away.
Yeah, Robert, I want to have you answer that. Talk a little bit about Carol's marriage to Powell and why it didn't work out.
So Carole was a very ambitious actress. And when she started working with Powell, Man of the World, 1931, they really hit it off. And she was sort of a social climber in a nice way. I mean, she wasn't ruthless by any stretch. Powell was in his 40s and Carole was what, 3? So they had a couple of strikes against them going into it just because she was young and vivacious and liked to party, go out to parties, be seen publicly, wear elegant gowns. And he was more of a stay-at-home type. And his fuddy-duddiness, I guess, just grated on her. And beginning on the honeymoon, they started to have problems. I mean, they had a disastrous honeymoon on a ship. They went somewhere to Hawaii or someplace, and she got sick immediately. She broke out in hives or something. And then it was sort of downhill from there. They made a striking looking couple. There's newsreel footage of them at premieres, and they just look great. And the fact that they remained friends after the marriage ended, after 1933, they made My Man Godfrey together in 36. When he contracted colon cancer in 37 or 38, she was there at his side through, the horrible treatments that he went through. So it's a credit to both of them that they remained friends. But it was a union that was cursed from the beginning, really.
And I love that conception of Carole Lombard, who, for all intents and purposes, from what exists, your book and others out there, was a genuinely nice person. And of course, to watch her in a lot of her movies, she often played the shop girl, the kind of the Cinderella that is working hard and trying to make good in the world. Even when she plays a daffy heiress in something like My Man Godfrey, you can't help but still want to root for her. She doesn't come off as standoffish. And I don't know what Barry Sanders has against Carole Lombard, but he seems to really dislike her in this movie. Jill Clayburgh is such an oddball choice for the character, and from all intents and purposes and all the research that I could find online, there were a million ideas for who could play Gable. Like, Burt Reynolds was in the mix, Warren Beatty was considered, Redford. Any man that was semi-popular at that time was offered this role. Burt Reynolds turned it down several times. He did not want to do it. He was a smart man. But yet I have found no idea about who they wanted as Lombard. Which makes me believe, and from what I've read, Jill Clayburgh was a literal last-minute casting choice. Like, the sets were up, they had people ready to go, they had no Lombard. So it makes me believe that Jill Clayburgh was absolutely just a person they were like, we need woman, we need blonde woman, we need just find one and we can cast her. So I feel that unfortunately Jill Clayburgh is at a real disadvantage because they had no idea who they even wanted for the character, and that results in a character that Clayburgh tries very hard to give her a little zhuzh. But first off, Clayburgh was 32 when she made this. Lombard dies at 33. So there's nothing really, and I think part of it too is, I was talking to my mom as I was watching this idea that older generations are aging harder than younger people. So everybody just naturally looks older, but Lombard always looked young. Even when she's 33, she looks 27. She looks very young, and Jill Clayburgh definitely looks like a woman that is 32. There's nothing, and I think a lot of that is because she doesn't have that sparkle. She doesn't have that joie de vivre type of thing. And the movie does nothing to make her look more like Lombard. Lombard had very striking cheekbones. She was a very sharp, angular person, and they don't really do anything to contour Clayburgh's face. And I'm not saying that her looking more like the actress would have helped, but it would have shown effort. Because especially when you look at James Brolin, who looks like Gable, they give him the mustache, and I think they did something to his ears to kind of like make them stand out. They tried to make him look like his counterpart. And Clayburgh, her hairstyle never matches what Carole Lombard was wearing hairstyle-wise. It just looks odd. And I know Edith Head said she made a real effort to design recreations of Lombard's actual wardrobe. That ain't helping. I think Clayburgh, unfortunately, is miscast, but it's not like they had anybody better that they were willing to cast her with.
No amount of good casting, makeup, or wardrobe, or even set design or anything like that can make up for a poorly written character. There is nothing you can do to rescue a completely cardstock character, which is the way that they wrote Carole Lombard. When she is delivering the dirty jokes, when she's cursing up a storm, when she's fighting and telling everybody like, oh, she can knock someone out. There's like a fight scene early on, which is like really creepy and random. And I really hope wasn't based on anything real that actually happened. Robert, excellent. Yeah. You're shaking your head. Fantastic. Because it's so contrived and weird. But every single step, we are told that Carole Lombard is this brilliant, vivacious, quick-witted woman. And then at every other step, actually, no, she's an idiot, lovelorn child who will do anything to keep her man. And those two things just don't go together. And it's just, we have the character of Clark Gable written to be this sort of stone-faced hero who loves this woman but he wants to like hold on to his manly veneer and his manly character within Hollywood, and he wants to hold on to his title of king, and that's why he does, and everything he does has a somewhat reasonable for the time reason for why he does it. And at every turn, poor Carole Lombard is just meant to go, it's okay, I forgive you as long as you'll take me to bed. And that's just horrible. It's just a horribly written character.
Yeah, and if I could point out the two actors who could have played Gable and pulled it off at that time, they wouldn't have cost a lot of money or anything. One was Chad Everett. He was always had the Gable vibe, and the other was Dale Robertson. Always had the Gable vibe. Robertson may have been a little too old at that time, but he still could have landed in the ballpark at least. But I can't think of any actress who could have pulled off Lombard either at that time. And I have a story about that. In the late 70s, early 80s, I did a screenplay called Profane Angel about Carole Lombard. And I took it out to Hollywood and I hand-delivered it to Sharon Gless, who wanted to see it. And that was in 1985. I was trying to remember when all this happened. It never went anywhere because the well was still poisoned by Gable and Lombard. No one was going to take that on after what happened with this picture.
It's funny you bring that up because I was fortunate to interview a couple years ago Elaine Hendricks, who the millennials know as Meredith from the Parent Trap remake. And she talked about how in the 90s, after the success of Parent Trap, she pitched a Carole Lombard biopic with her as the star. And if you've seen The Parent Trap, they clearly modeled her off of Lombard. She's got the hair, she's got the makeup, she looks passably like Lombard. It would have been great. And she said that everybody turned her down because they were like, no one knows who that is. No one's going to know who that is. And that broke my heart because I was like, that was our moment, people. Like, we could have had, this is why we don't have nice things. Because I think Lombard is so evocative of the 1930s. She really is of that era. You know, you look at your Joan Crawfords and actresses that would take on that mantle doing comedy and drama. Barbara Stanwyck after Lombard's demise, and Stanwyck has such a hardness to her. She has such a rough edge, right? Lombard, to me, doesn't have that harsh edge. You know, she's all spitfire and sweetness. And, you know, you watch something like Hands Across the Table and you can't see Jean Arthur, you know, who's probably kind of the closest contemporary at that time to Carole Lombard. You can't see a Jean Arthur or a Claudette Colbert playing those characters. It always had to be Carole. And I think that she was one of a kind. And once she dies, which they often say kind of is the end of the 90s, Lombard's death really does usher in this feeling that like war is coming and everything's going to change. It's because she's so evocative of that time period and of old Hollywood in its infancy. All of that is not here at all.
She was such a remarkable human being, such a highly evolved human being. She was down to earth. She was generous. She projected love and felt love to everyone that was in her orbit. to the point that she would smother people with love. She loved them so much, and it was genuine love. And she was the antithesis of what you describe in the character in Gable and Lombard, Emily, just the antithesis of that.
It's such a shame that the main thing that I've learned about female success in old Hollywood since doing this is that oftentimes you had people who knew how abusive the system was. And so they cultivated a shell or, a sort of carapace to protect themselves. And oftentimes that slowly seeped into their entire being and hardened their heart. And that's the most notorious story that we get about women who survived the old Hollywood machine, is that if they died young, it was usually at their own hand, at a lover, or because of drugs. And you're just like, oh my gosh, it's always so depressing to learn about these really intelligent, vivacious, promising young women who then get kind of chewed up and spat out. And to know that Carole Lombard, she was doing something that was extremely altruistic in the 1940s. I know a lot of people went on USO tours or sold bonds and things like that. That was very highly expected of them during the time. But the movie makes allusion to the fact that she sold millions of dollars worth of war bonds. She was incredibly popular amongst the people. Again, Robert, you can confirm whether or not that's an accurate detail. And then to be taken out by something as catastrophic but mundane as like an airplane accident, an airplane crash, to have someone who by reputation is the smothering of old Hollywood hasn't gotten to her yet, and she's snuffed out sort of in this catastrophic accident. It's so much more depressing now that I know more about the history of other actresses who were taken out just by the cruelty of the industry.
Well, what I think is interesting is that Lombard's death in this movie is not situated as the death of Hollywood or really anything, It's more like, isn't it sad that this pretty woman died? And because we glom that onto the end. He's like, she was just so happy. Everything was going so well. She wanted to have a baby. And it's just like, well, I've watched Dateline. I know,
this movie positioned it as the worst thing that ever happened to Clark Gable, not the worst thing that ever happened to Carole Lombard.
We'll talk about the end, which pretty much just ends with like, isn't it sad that Gable was able to like rise above? This movie is Gable and Lombard, parenthesis, but Gable is the most important person. And I mean, I want to talk about some of the other Hollywood issues I had. You brought up Alan Garfield, Robert, as Louis B. I've seen several conceptions of Louis B. Mayer over the lifetime of Hollywood. And if you watch something like Mommy Dearest, he's this taciturn, pretty much agnostic. You don't really know a whole lot about him. He's just the guy that like puts the thumbs up and the thumbs down in the arena of Hollywood and says whether her career is go or no go. Here, he's just like the third person in bed with them practically. Like he pops up. He's just like sitting on a couch and they enter a room and he's like, I'm trying to help you. Why does nobody let me help them as I'm trying? His whole thing is, well, this is going to destroy Gable's career if people find out that he's a married man dating another woman. And the whole thing is like, he's a horrible person for keeping these two lovers apart. But it's all based on the need of what's best for MGM. Which weirdly enough, we never talk about the fact that like, Carole Lombard wasn't an MGM player. She was a Paramount player. She talks about going to Paramount, but you just assume everybody is under the umbrella of Louis B. Mayer at some point. And yet at the same time, for as much as Mayer is trying to control their situation, they're doing things in this movie that would have destroyed a star of that time period, where Gable is giving the speech at this like women's society and Lombard dresses up in this like kind of streetwalker's outfit and shows up and starts talking about penises. And you're just like, I'm pretty sure that would have ruined a career no matter what. Like Lombard is continually in this movie doing things that would have destroyed somebody's career. Gable ain't doing all these things. He ain't making grand gestures. He's like maybe hiding up in the rafters while she's filming a bathtub scene to kind of spy on her. But like Lombard is actively sabotaging her career in this movie for love, supposedly, which I doubt was true. Robert, was that a thing that was happening?
No, that was not happening. So Lombard did go through her party period. She had that house on Hollywood Boulevard that's still there, still looks the same, still connected to her. And that lasted about a year. It was during the Russ Columbo period where she had a barnyard party. She had the hospital party. You came dressed as a doctor or a nurse. You came dressed as a cowboy. But that all ended when Russ Columbo died. She would not have done any of those things. And that's what's so egregious about this. That's what's got her spinning it for as long, because that was just not her. It was not her to show people up. It was not her to be cruel. She did do that thing when Gable made Parnell, where it was a bomb for Gable. It was a thing that was not received well. And except she said that it was received well in China, and like A Million Chinamen Can't Be Wrong. Parnell's a great picture. That's as close as she would come. She would do little digs at him, at his ego, just to keep in balance. But that was it.
Well, like you were saying, part of her relationship with Powell ending was because of her desire for autonomy. And this movie says, well, she would have given that all up for Gable. She just wants to stay at home and cook him dinner. Or when she's not jumping into bed with him and talking about, like, they just need to have sex all the time, which I think is just bizarre.
Most sand in my oyster situations about this movie is the entire time that Clark Gable is absolutely positive that he can just go back to Ohio and start a farm and he'll be fine. I am so noble.
Which he never did, by the way.
Which he never did. He's like, I am so noble and I am such a man and I am so unaffected by Hollywood and the extremely high paychecks that he's being paid that he can go back to, hop on the train back to Ohio at any time. And Louis B. Mayer sits him down, the character, and is like, Carol can't do that. She's just a self-centered woman who needs people fawning over her at all time. That the second she doesn't have an audience telling her how brilliant and beautiful and funny and charismatic and perfect she is, she's just going to die by her own hand because she's such a weak woman who could never do that. And I was like, buddy, if you don't think every actress in Hollywood knows her expiration date and that it's looming her entire life, I don't know if you've ever spoken to an actress. Like, that is just the most asinine thing in the world to tell Clark Gable that he has a potential to be successful and excellent at anything he does, and he'll be happy doing anything. But Carole Lombard, she'll wither like a flower the second the adoration is cut off. And it's just like, these are a conversation two men are having about the only woman in the entire movie.
I think that's the biggest problem with the old Hollywood biopic train we got through the 1970s into even the 90s. I mean, Lifetime continued this on into the 90s when they did an Elizabeth Taylor story with Sherilyn Fenn, of all people, which actually, that makes sense. But they've always had trouble talking about actresses of this period. And I'd argue you can even see it today in the numerous Marilyn biopics, we get that still don't seem to understand how to look at her without it being through the prism of pain. And I think with this, it's something like Carol Baker's Harlow biopic and some of those other ones. It's this idea that any woman that gets into that industry in that time period was really just waiting to find, was looking for success, but was really waiting for a husband. That push-pull that we see even now of wanting fame and success, but also realizing you can't have it all, and that if you want a husband and children someday, you're gonna have to give all that up. And movies have not really figured out what to do with that. There are some amazing women that don't have biopics, from this time period. And I think it's just because Hollywood's like, yeah, but, how can, what's the point of their existence in the industry, unless they're fighting against something, or it has to be tied into their desirability or something like that, which is really, really frustrating. We haven't talked about James Brolin in this film. And again, he's about as good as you probably were ever gonna get. If it came down to him and Reynolds, I get why he was involved. James Brolin was consistently acting at this point. I think this movie kind of put him down a slippery slope that led to a lot of what he was doing in the 1980s. This was a guy that at one point touted he was almost James Bond. Okay, you're like watching this and you're like, I don't know if I buy that. He's fine. He's fine as far as this conception of Gable is concerned. And this Gable, not that interesting, by the way. Gable is a guy that, much like Lana Turner, kind of a notorious dater, before and after, you hear the stories. There's stories about how he had fake teeth and he had bad breath. That was like a huge thing that has permeated the zeitgeist. And you're like, okay, I find it hard that this is, if you have to play your movie up as they're always hopping in bed, I'm starting to wonder if that's true. Okay, like I'm starting to wonder if the lady doth protest too much, but his Gable is supposed to be not necessarily a matinee idol. He's not even really a person. He's Rhett Butler. I think that's my biggest issue. This movie is very much those movies that these two starred in. There's a scene where Lombard is doing a scavenger hunt, like My Man Godfrey. The movie pretty much says everything you saw on screen was true. Even the plots of their movies, those are all real. Those are documentaries. This is all stuff that actually happened to them. And Brolin's performance is just, a lot of the reviews that I read cited that it's an imitation. He's got the voice, he's got the personality, or the characterization, but not the personality. Because there is really no personality to him, He chastises her, they fight, they get in bed. He chastises her, they fight. It's very repetitious, their relationship. He is what, you would assume if you want somebody that looks kind of like Gable, but there's no character to latch onto.
No. And Gable was a tough one to nail, though, because he was very self-centered. He was quiet. He was a loner. He was not a social person. He's not easy to capture. And it would probably take a mini-series. It would probably take a limited series. And it would be probably a pretty good one to understand his own story arc. And when you see what the death of CAROLE Lombard did to him, the real Gable, and let's talk about the fact that he shows up in uniform at the crash site.
Yes.
Okay? Come on. He didn't join the Army Air Corps until 6 months after she was dead, and he only joined because she was dead. And he wanted to join the Air Corps. He demanded to join the Air Corps so he could go up in a bomber and get shot down and die like she had died in a plane crash. That's how devastated he was, but he only realized what he had when she was gone. So, I mean, like, there's all of that. So that's really the backbone of my book, Fireball, is what happened to Gable, like, with her death and the explosion of growth of his soul after she died. And you could sort of backfill to understand what he was really like if you wanted to do a thoughtful screenplay, but unfortunately they didn't do any of that for this movie.
The characterization of Brolin doing Clark Gable feels like an SNL character. He's supposed to walk on stage and you're supposed to go, it's like it's being done on the Celebrity Jeopardy sketch from like the early 2000s where you're like, I gather that is Clark Gable because he's got the ears and the teeth and the eyebrows. And so I got it. Cool. That's where we're at. And that's the extent of the depth of it. No, I imagine that he was a rather taciturn man in actual life, but he has no emotions whatsoever except for self-righteousness throughout this entire thing. And again, like Kristen said, it feels more like they are writing Rhett Butler into a movie rather than like an actual human being who married multiple women, was going through a contentious divorce, had an incredibly on the rise like career throughout the 6-month or 9-year character arc of this movie. There's nothing there happening. It's a sketch.
I like what Robert said about him being selfish, because I would have loved to have seen some flaws to him other than what is presented, which is like, I don't say I love you. I don't say that to any dame, and I'm not going to say it to you. And when he finally does, it's not played as a grand moment. It's just like, well, you broke me down, woman. Guess I'm going to do it. And I would have appreciated a story like what you explained, Robert, about how this was a guy that, I mean, even starting the movie, I think, with him going to war and being like, I'm on a suicide mission, this is what I want, I think would have helped, because the way it's presented chronologically, again, time has no meaning. We don't even know when anything happens except for Gone with the Wind, which we know was, 38, 39. I would have appreciated, there's stories about how he was potentially in a relationship with Lana Turner, but right towards the end of their relationship that he was cheating on Lombard. I would have loved a story about a guy that's like, I was a shit when I was dating this woman, or when I was married to her, and now she's gone, and what the hell do I do? This movie doesn't even end with a text crawl, which I think would have helped a lot. The fact Gable did marry 2 more times. He eventually got married in 55 to Kay Spreckles, who was a fashion model and an actress, and he had his son with her. And she was the one that let him be buried next to Lombard. And I think that would have, even putting that up there, would have been like, Gable's buried next to Lombard, like they're together. I think that would have done something to emphasize this great love story. I don't know. Brolin doesn't give me, I think because him and Clayburgh just don't have any chemistry.
Weirdest thing about this whole movie to me is that I cannot believe, regardless of how madly, passionately you were in love with your partner, if you're actors, you're not jealous of them having to smooch another person in a movie. That's like a whole 20-minute segment of this movie where she is sneaking onto the set of Gone with the Wind because she's positive that he's going to run off with Vivian Leigh, and then he sneaks onto a set of I don't know what movie where she's supposedly kissing some other man who they never actually say, because this is all fabricated and absolutely insane. But it seems they set up the idea that these people are jealous of one another, suspicious of one another, angry with one another, untrusting of one another, hesitant with one another, but gosh darn it, they just love each other. And it's like every single moment of the lead up to that is not what people do when they love and care about one another. And then, like you said, for him to be buried next to her, for him to then want to, honestly die by the worst circumstances imaginable because this woman that he loved so much died in a catastrophic accident. Again, all of that is something that happens when your soul is shattered in two and the love of your life leaves your plane of existence early in a catastrophic way. But none of that is actually in the text in the movie preceding her death.
No, it's so frustrating, and it's so inept, I think, really, when you look at it. I mean, Sidney J. Furie had found success with biopics. He had done Lady Sings the Blues about Billie Holiday with Diana Ross, which was relatively well regarded. But yeah, I don't really know what the issue is. And I think it might be Barry Sandler's script. He wasn't really a big screenwriter. This was his first real script that he had done. He had done 2 other features before this, but he would go on to do the Goldie Hawn movie, The Duchess and the Dirtwater Fox. He was uncredited on The Other Side of Midnight. He did some 80s movies. I mean, he really only did a small handful of projects before disappearing into the ether. He's still alive, as far as we know. So is Sidney J. Furie. But I think that this is one of those movies that it points to a lot of the issues with the biopics of the 70s into the 80s about old Hollywood, which is we want to create this fantasy of what that looked like. We're creating this painting, we're etching this depiction of what old Hollywood is for future generations. I think because people were still alive, there was this fear of we don't want to besmirch anybody's image unless they're already dead. So Marilyn, fair game. You can say whatever the hell you want about her. But anybody else, I mean, I think the W.C. Fields film is relatively vague on him. Bogey very much is a biopic about look at how magnificent this man was. Wasn't it tragic that he smoked himself to death?
Nothing buttons up this movie better than, well, frankly, the last line delivered in the entire movie, which is he's getting driven, I believe, out to the accident site. And Clark Gable is sitting in the backseat of the car, and he decides to tearfully deliver a dirty joke that Carol had told him somewhere at some middling point of the movie.
So we have to hear this bad joke twice, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a horrible joke. It's not even really that funny. You can see where it's coming from, like, the second it's delivered. And it's this really bad joke. And he's delivering it through, like, taciturn sobs.
You would think he's, like, on the Titanic, displaying his love with how much emotion he's giving it.
And he is just fighting through the tears. And he garners a Southern accent, even though he's from Ohio. And it's this and the thing is if you thought you were going to bookend the movie with this, like, she's just so witty that, like, I'm going to miss the vivaciousness and the sparkle she brought to my life, all I could think of was, once the credits started running, wouldn't you have chosen a better joke?
Was laughing because I was like, what? I would love it if he had told it, like, wrong. He was like, it's about this guy. Wait, there's another thing in here. Like, I trust me, if you had known my wife, she would have thought it was hilarious. I'm telling you wrong. I would have.
So bad.
It's so bad. It boils Carole Lombard down quite literally to a joke, which I think is the most offensive kind of face slap of this film.
When you do see her in Godfrey, she is just so sparkly. You can't take your eyes off of her for the entire film. And like you said earlier in the episode, you don't blame her for it. You don't hate her for it. You just hope that the character becomes an adult and grows up, and you want to see the life that she leads ahead of her. And that's one of the most brilliant parts about that movie. And I'm assuming something that she brought to many of her roles, which is that this character, this woman, has promise. And that's what you see in her face, her perpetually young face, which is that this is a woman with everything ahead of her. And this movie boils her down to not even just a joke, but a bad one, like a dead fish, awful joke. And it's so unfortunate.
Yeah.
Well,
I do want to. Oh, go on, Robert.
I wanted to get it on the record before we closed here. This is a woman, you were talking earlier about what Hollywood was like, and it was misogynistic and it chewed people up and spit them out. But she rode that wave. She survived all of that. She thrived in it. There's a theory that was the basis of her profane existence, her language. Is she wanted to be one of the guys. She wanted to let the guys know they couldn't get anything past her. They weren't going to intimidate her. They weren't going to force her to do anything she didn't want to do, because she was tough, and she had that tough side to her. We didn't see that at all. They misinterpreted it. They missed the mark on that. They didn't understand her toughness, that it was a shell, but that she didn't use it in a malicious way at all. So that's the sophistication of the character that we didn't see, and that was so misinterpreted by this novice screenwriter.
Yeah. I also want to throw out, before we start to wrap up, the biggest plot point in this movie is the Gable paternity suit that takes place. This is not the Loretta Young paternity suit, right?
Right.
No,
there was
Loretta
another
Young.
one later. Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say, yeah. So this is some unnamed paternity suit that Gable was not found to be the father of the child, but he claims to Lombard that he is, so that she'll go back to work. He's sparing her. And I think that you find out that it is Carol that goes on the stand and talks about, we're in an illicit relationship, so he can't be screwing around because he's always there. And she goes on like a 2-minute speech about his ass, which I was just like, cool, that's on the record, apparently, about describing Gable's backside, which I've read online is not true at all. But I think what's interesting is now the rediscovery of this movie after the Loretta Young story came out, about how the question of whether it was sexual assault or not, it really does color, I think, this presentation of the movie even more. Because you're watching the story of this guy that is in this paternity suit, and knowing now, again, as much as we know, we'll never know 100% the truth, but it does, I think, leave it makes that scene age even worse, I think is what I'm saying. And that wasn't the only, Chaplin does that in a couple Years later, Chaplin also had a famous paternity suit that now is even more colored by Chaplin's own peccadillos. So I think that making that the highlight of the narrative, that will he get off from this paternity suit? Will he have to care for a child that isn't his? Which, I mean, Gable did have a child that was his. That if anybody's read Judy Lewis's biography, they didn't really have a great relationship. They didn't interact at all. I think she met him once or twice when she was a child. I think it's really hoping you don't know dick about in either of these people. It really hopes you know absolutely nothing. And in 76 with no internet, when you're only reading books, okay, fine, that makes sense. But this movie has ended up aging like milk, watching it now in this era of the internet and changing to how we look at gender and how we look at all sorts of things. So it's even worse. It's even worse now in 2025.
Yeah, it used to just be annoying.
I got to do this movie. I've been hyping it. I don't even know how I could find something else to hype even more than Gable and Lombard. Maybe one day we'll do Goodbye Norma Jean. Actually, let's never do Goodbye Norma Jean. That movie is actually like disgustingly reprehensible. Just wait, somebody's gonna send me an
I saw that first. I saw too.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that you had to endure that. It's awful. Maybe even I think it's worse than this. It's actually worse than this because this movie is at least filmed with like great cameras and like real competent people. Goodbye Norma Jean looks like a film made in somebody's basement. Yeah, oh, it's great. It's great. It's 90 minutes of just like pure tragedy porn. It's so awful. But Misty Rowe, friend of the podcast, Misty Rowe, she tries very hard. She's been very candid about working on that film. Conversation for another time. Overall, this movie's bad. It's very bad. It's very, very bad. It's a weird time capsule if you absolutely need to see like how people have done old Hollywood biopics. I'm bummed that we've never tried to do something with it again. That the stink of the movie has kind of permeated. Because like you said, Robert, I think there could be a mini-series, limited series. I have no idea who the hell you would cast today to play either of these characters. I mean, I think Anya Taylor-Joy, I always say Anya Taylor-Joy because she's got that elven appearance, would be an interesting Carol. Odds are they'd cast like Austin Butler or somebody to play Clark Gable or something. Yeah. Emily's face. But I think you could do it. I think you could do it today. I wish somebody would so that we didn't have just this movie to look at. Emily, Robert, final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, why don't you have me back sometime to talk about something good?
Yes, we will have you back to talk about something good. Yes, I promise. But listeners, let us know what you think about Gable Lombard, Jill Clayburgh, James Brolin. I don't really care. Goodbye, Norma Jean. You can email it to us at ticklishbiz@gmail.com, or you can drop it to us via social media. We are at ticklishbiz everywhere except Twitter, which is at ticklish_biz. I would love to thank Robert Matzen for jumping on last minute to join us to talk about this horrible movie. Robert, where can fans find you? Any preferred place they should buy your book? Anything you have coming up that they should know about?
RobertMatzen.com. It's still there. I'm working on something now about World War II. I think you should go out and buy Warrior Audrey Hepburn, the book that came out during the pandemic where I couldn't tour with it or anything, but I'm so proud of that one. So that's my plug. Go buy Warrior Audrey Hepburn.
Yay. We'll drop all the links to your stuff in the show notes so people can buy all your books. And yes, we will have you back to talk about Carol or Audrey Hepburn or whoever you want. I promise we will make up for having to talk about this terrible, terrible film. So please help us support us. I know times are tough. Even at just $1, it shows your support for Ticklish Business. That's at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. I am also starting my classic film Secret Santa gift exchange. I've been doing this for a long time, and people continue to keep engaging with it. Last year I didn't do it because of my books, but I'm back. And would love to have a lot of people swapping some old Hollywood-inspired gifts this holiday season. You can contact me through Patreon or social media to get in on that if you are interested. I am on social media at Kristen K. Lopez, except for Instagram, where I'm at Kristen Lopez 88. You can get in touch with me there. My site, The Film Maven, at thefilmmaven.com is where I do all my writing and reviews. And I also have my new book, Popcorn Disabilities, which is now out. We're going to be doing some more events throughout the next couple of months. So You can get a signed copy. We also are going to have some signed copies via Larry Edmonds or wherever you get your books. So please consider purchasing one today. Emily Edwards, what's going on with you? Where are you online?
I am across Blue Sky and Instagram. Those are my two main social media feeds over at Ms. Emily Edwards. I'm also at MsEmilyEdwards.com, and that is where you can sign up for my newsletter where I talk about silver screen sleuths and all sorts of movie mysteries. We are jumping into our Christmas mysteries, which there's more than you would expect in Christmas mysteries. We just finished up our Noir-vember content, so that is a hoot and a half. You can also find my books, which are comedic noir mysteries. Wherever books are sold, they're the Girl Friday mysteries under Emily J. Edwards, and they're also available on audiobook. So if that's how you prefer to listen to your stories, clearly, if you're you're listening to a podcast, you can find those wherever you find audiobooks and also various streaming platforms, believe it or not. So that's pretty neat. I did not know that was a thing, but that's something you can do now too. So isn't that fantastic? Technology.
Yay. And as always, our Patreon keeps the lights on at Ticklish Biz HQ and lets us do all sorts of super fun things, including prepping our swag bags that I'm going to be giving out to patrons. You can start at just $1 at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode. This time we're getting into the Christmas spirit, and we are going to be talking about, technically, a TV special. We're going to be talking about the Rankin Bass Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Till then.